Claude responded. My son told me the best graduation gift I could give him was to disappear from the ceremony. Because I wasn't his real father, just Walter, the man who paid the... My son told me the best graduation gift I could give him was to disappear from the ceremony, because I wasn't his real father, just Walter, the man who paid the tuition. His mother sat right there and said nothing, so I gave them exactly what they asked for. I sold the cabin, canceled the med school deposit, and what I left behind in that empty garage is the reason his stepbrother is now testifying against him in federal court. Before I tell you how I dismantled 40 years of lies in 11 days, tell me, son, where are you watching from tonight? Hit like and subscribe if you believe a man's name is worth more than his checkbook. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 66 years old. For 31 years, I ran the risk division of a regional insurance company in Ohio. The kind of job where you spend your whole career telling other people how disaster is going to find them, and you never once think it's going to find you at your own dinner table. Last Tuesday started like any other Tuesday. My wife Carol called me into the kitchen because she said we needed to talk about Nathan's graduation. Nathan is Carol's son from her first marriage. I've raised that boy since he was 6 years old. I taught him to throw a curveball in the backyard of the house I bought us in Westerville. I sat up 3 nights a week for 2 years quizzing him on organic chemistry flashcards so he could get into a pre-med program. I co-signed $41,000 in student loans nobody else in that family could touch with a credit score like mine. Carol had her laptop open on the kitchen island. On the screen was an invitation, cream cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind you pay a graphic designer $400 to make look like an old family crest. It was for Nathan's white coat ceremony, the formal event medical schools hold before the first year even starts. Carol turned the screen toward me like she was showing me a menu. Nathan wants to keep the guest list small, she said. Just close family. I nodded. Of course. I started making a mental list of who to call to get out of a Rotary breakfast that same weekend. So, Carol said, not looking at me, that means it'll just be me, Nathan, and Russell. Russell. Nathan's biological father. The man who left when Nathan was 5 years old to go sell timeshares in Florida and didn't send a birthday card again until Nathan turned 18 and got into a good school, at which point Russell suddenly remembered he had a son worth being seen with. I set my coffee cup down slow, the way you do when you're trying not to let your hand shake in front of people who are watching for it. I think there's a mistake, I said. I assume I'm invited. Carol finally looked at me. Not with guilt, with the particular patience adults use on a child who's said something embarrassing in public. Walter, honey, Nathan and I talked about this. It's not that we don't love you. It's just that this is such a milestone, and Nathan feels like it should be his real family in that room. Russell is his blood, you understand. I did not understand. I understood the number 41,000, and I understood the number 190,000, which was what the 4 years of tuition and housing were projected to cost me once Nathan actually started, and I understood the number 0, which is what Russell had contributed to any part of that boy's life, until it became convenient to show up wearing a blazer he probably bought on a payment plan. I paid for the tuition deposit, I said quietly. I paid for the housing deposit. I've been paying for that boy's education since before he could spell the word doctor. Carol's jaw tightened. Please don't make this about money. This is Nathan's day. Do you really want to stand in his one photo looking like the awkward stepdad nobody invited? Russell has that whole distinguished professor look. It fits the pictures better. You know how you get in photos, all stiff, like you're at a board meeting. I looked at my wife of 19 years, the woman whose car payments I covered when her salon closed during the pandemic, the woman whose mother's assisted living facility I have paid for, in full, every month, for 6 years, without her family offering 1 cent. I waited for her to correct herself. I waited for the sentence that started with, "Actually, Nathan, that's not fair to Walter." It never came. She reached over and closed the laptop, like the conversation, and I were both finished business. I did not raise my voice. 31 years assessing catastrophic risk teaches you that the moment you show emotion in a negotiation, you've already lost your leverage. I picked my coffee back up and said, "Understood. I hope it's a beautiful ceremony." Then I excused myself and walked out to the garage, the only room in that house that still felt entirely like mine, and I sat down at my workbench in the dark for a long time, listening. Through the vent above my workbench, I could hear the kitchen. Carol was on the phone. I recognized the particular high, tinkling laugh she saves for people she wants to impress. He actually just said okay, she was saying. I swear, Russell, the man rolls over every single time. I don't know how Nathan puts up with him, honestly, but he's useful. Once the ceremony's over and Nathan's settled into the apartment, we start talking about listing the cabin. I figure I can get Walter to agree to a simplified retirement, and once that's cashed out, there's plenty left over for Nathan's car and for us to finally take that trip to Portugal you keep talking about. There was a pause. I heard a man's voice on the other end, tinny and distant. Russell, does he suspect anything about what happens after the wedding? I mean, after graduation? Russell asked. God, no. Carol laughed. He thinks he's so sharp with all his actuarial tables, but the second it comes to family, he turns into mush. He wants to be needed. It's honestly kind of pathetic. He's basically an ATM that reads bedtime stories. An ATM that reads bedtime stories. Something in my chest went very still and very cold. The way a lake freezes over first at the edges where nobody's looking. I stood up, walked to the wall behind my workbench, and moved aside the pegboard where I hang my tools. Behind it was a small floor safe I'd installed years ago, back when Carol still asked me before rearranging furniture. I turned the dial. Left to 9, right to 22, left to 4. The door clicked open. Inside was a blue accordion folder labeled Estate and Premarital Documents. I hadn't opened it in years. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside, because I had drafted every page of it myself, back when a good lawyer friend from Rotary told me, Walter, you're a risk man. Insure yourself, too. The cabin on Lake Erie, the one Carol's mother lived out her golden years in every summer, the one Nathan learned to fish off the dock at, had been purchased entirely with an inheritance from my own father, before Carol and I even married. It was titled solely in my name, protected by a prenuptial agreement Carol had signed in front of independent counsel 9 years ago, back when she still needed my signature to co-sign her salon lease, and was grateful for every bit of help I offered. I pulled the tuition deposit confirmation for Nathan's medical school. My signature, my checking account, my name as the sole authorized payer of record. I was not the awkward stepdad standing at the edge of the photograph. I was the entire photograph, and the photograph was about to develop very differently than anyone in that kitchen expected. I picked up my phone and called a number I hadn't dialed in 3 years. Higgins, the voice on the other end said. Gruff, half asleep, but already alert the second he heard my voice. Marvin Okafor had been my attorney since a workplace liability case back in 2009, and in all that time I had never once called him after 9 at night. Marvin, it's Walter. I need to move fast on something. You sound like a man standing over a body, Marvin said. Not yet, I said, looking at the framed photo on my workbench of Nathan at 8 years old, holding up a bluegill he'd caught off our dock, grinning with 2 missing front teeth. I turned the frame face down. I need the cabin listed with a cash buyer, closed within 10 days if possible, and I need every dollar I've put toward Nathan's tuition deposit and housing deposit clawed back or canceled before the ceremony. There was a silence, then the scratch of a pen. Talk, Marvin said. I've got a legal pad and I've got coffee. Go. For the next hour I laid it all out, calm and clinical, the way I used to present quarterly loss projections to the board. I told him about the cabin sale. I told him about the tuition escrow account that still had 90 days before the funds were considered non-refundable, which meant I had a window, a narrow one, but a window. I told him to cancel the housing deposit at the university apartment complex, the one I had wired $11,000 into just 6 weeks earlier. I told him to prepare paperwork dissolving my joint authorization on 3 accounts Carol used for daily spending, all of which, by the terms of our prenuptial agreement, were subject to my sole discretion since the majority of the funds originated from my premarital assets. I did not want to burn the house down. I am not a cruel man. But losing the money was acceptable to me. Losing my name in that boy's story was not. When I hung up, the house was silent. Carol was upstairs, likely already dreaming about handbags in Portugal. Nathan was 3 states away at his college apartment, blissfully unaware that his entire financial safety net was quietly being dismantled by the very man he'd asked to disappear from his own graduation. I walked to the safe one last time and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a graduation gift I'd already purchased, a vintage stethoscope that had belonged to my own father, an old country doctor, engraved with Nathan's initials. It had cost me nothing but sentiment, which made it worth more than anything else in that house. I looked at it under the workbench light for a long moment. Then I set it gently in the bottom drawer of my toolbox, not the trash, because I am not spiteful for spite's sake. But I was no longer certain that boy deserved it, and I needed time to decide. The next morning, the sun hit the kitchen with that aggressive cheerfulness reserved for mornings that are about to fall apart. Carol was blending a green smoothie, the noise drowning out any need for conversation, which suited her fine. "Morning, Walter," she said, sliding a glass toward me. "Big day today. We need to finalize the caterer for the little celebration dinner after the ceremony. And I was thinking, since Russell's flying in, maybe we upgrade his hotel room. Something nicer than the Comfort Inn. It reflects on the family, you know." I took a slow sip of the smoothie. Kale, ginger, and quiet contempt. "Actually," I said, setting the glass down, "I've been thinking about what you said, about making it Nathan's day. I want it to be perfect." Carol turned, surprised. "Really?" I nodded, keeping my face a smooth, corporate blank. "If Russell's walking into that photo as the distinguished family patriarch, he should look the part. Let's put him up somewhere nice. And that celebration dinner, let's do it right. Private room, good wine, the works." Carol actually clapped her hands together like a delighted child. "See? I told Nathan you'd come around. I'll call the restaurant." While she reached for her phone, my own phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. A text from Marvin. "Cabin sale contract ready. Buyer wiring funds today. Escrow closes in 9 days." I felt something settle in my chest. Not joy exactly. More like the calm you feel watching a long, complicated math problem finally balance out to zero. We spent that day and the next hemorrhaging money exactly the way they wanted, and exactly the way I needed them to. I approved the private dining room. I approved the hotel upgrade for Russell. I called the university housing office myself and, in a very calm, very believable voice, confirmed that yes, we would be sending an additional deposit for a nicer unit for Nathan, closer to the hospital, more square footage. What I did not tell the woman on the phone was that Marvin's paralegal was on a call with that same office 40 minutes later, formally rescinding the deposit under my sole authorization as the account holder. By Thursday, the illusion I had built was enormous and beautiful and entirely hollow, like a float in a parade made of nothing but papier-mâché and other people's confidence. Friday morning, I woke before dawn. I put on the gray suit I used to wear for board presentations, out of old habit more than anything else. Carol stirred beside me. "Where are you going so early?" "Meeting the financial planner," I said, the lie coming easier than I expected. "Making sure everything's squared away before the ceremony tomorrow." "Good," she mumbled, already half back asleep. "Don't forget Russell's flight arrives at 11. Make sure the car service is booked." I walked downstairs, past the mantel covered in photos of a family that had, in its own quiet way, already decided I wasn't really in it. I looked at the spot on the living room floor where I'd taught Nathan to walk on a cast after he broke his ankle skateboarding, where I'd stayed up with him until 2 a.m., helping him format a college essay. He was too proud to admit he was terrified of writing badly. It didn't have to be this way. If they'd shown me 1 ounce of the gratitude I'd earned, if Nathan had simply said, "Of course you're invited, you're my dad," none of what came next would have happened. But he didn't say that, so I locked the front door behind me, placed the key in the lockbox I'd installed on the porch railing that morning, and drove to a diner in town where I ordered black coffee and waited by the window. At 9 o'clock exactly, my phone buzzed with a notification. All shared accounts frozen. Authorized card declined. At 9:15, the first text arrived. It was from Carol. "Walter, my card just got declined at the salon. So embarrassing. Fix this now." I did not reply. At 9:30, the moving company I had quietly hired called to confirm. "The crew is on site at the cabin," they said. "Do we proceed with the inventory and transfer to storage as instructed?" "Proceed," I said. At 10, my phone would not stop ringing. Carol, Nathan, Russell, whose number I didn't even remember saving, the university housing office. confused about the retracted deposit. The caterer, wanting to know if the private room booking was still confirmed. I watched each name light up the screen in turn and felt something I hadn't felt in 19 years of marriage. Complete, uninterrupted silence inside my own skull. I had a graduation ceremony to attend the next day, and I fully intended to be there. Saturday morning, the university auditorium was full of proud families in their Sunday best. Moms crying before anyone had even said a word. Dads fumbling with camera phones. I sat in the very back row, in a section reserved for staff and press, wearing a plain navy blazer, unremarkable, easy to miss in a crowd. Nathan walked across that stage in his white coat, and for 1/2 of 1 second, our eyes met across the auditorium. Something flickered in his face, some old muscle memory of the man who taught him to throw a curveball trying to surface through the newer, more convenient story he'd been told about who his real family was. Then Carol, sitting in the 3rd row beside Russell, in his upgraded, unpaid-for hotel suit, squeezed his hand, and the flicker passed. I did not approach them after the ceremony. I had already said everything I needed to say through 11 days of silence and a stack of legal paperwork. 3 days later, everything detonated at once, exactly the way Marvin and I had planned it. The tuition deposit, formally rescinded under my sole authorization, triggered an automatic hold on Nathan's enrollment, pending new payment arrangements. The housing deposit, also rescinded, meant the apartment he believed was already secured was released back to the wait list. The cabin closed escrow that same week. The funds wired to an account Carol didn't know existed, one I'd quietly built over 3 decades specifically for a day I'd hoped would never come, but had insured against anyway, the way you insure against any low-probability, high-impact event. Carol called 61 times in 4 days. I know because Marvin kept a log for the eventual court filing. Then came the part I hadn't planned for, though in hindsight, I should have. Russell, the distinguished patriarch with the rugged professor look, had been staying in that upgraded hotel suite on a card I was still, technically, paying for at the time of the initial charge, though that charge had been made before the freeze. When his own card, the one he'd promised to use for incidentals, got declined at a Cleveland casino 2 nights after graduation, hotel security called the police over an unpaid $4,000 tab he'd tried to walk out on. In the resulting report, Russell, panicking, offered up information about an insurance scheme he and a golf buddy had been running for years, falsified disability claims, the exact kind of fraud I had spent 31 years of my career learning to detect. It turned out Russell hadn't just been living off broken promises to his own son. He'd been living off broken promises to an entire insurance company. Very interested in what he had to say once he started talking to save himself from a felony theft charge in Cleveland. 6 weeks later, I was sitting on the back porch of a small house I'd bought outright near Asheville, North Carolina, close enough to the mountains that the air smelled like pine instead of exhaust, when Marvin called with an update. "Russell's cooperating with federal investigators now," he said. "Turns out your stepson's biological father has been running a fraud ring since before Nathan was even born. Might be the reason he disappeared in the first place. Man's looking at real time, Walter." I sat with that for a long moment, watching the sun drop behind the ridge, painting the sky the color of a fireplace just catching. "And Carol?" I asked. "The judge upheld the prenup without much of a fight," Marvin said. "The conspiracy clause did the rest. No spousal support. She's back working reception at a dermatology office in Columbus. Lost the house within 4 months once the equity ran out." "And Nathan?" Marvin paused. "He took a gap year. Working retail, from what my investigator could tell. Applied for private loans on his own for medical school. Got denied. Credit's too thin without a cosigner." I didn't feel joy hearing that. I want to be honest about that. For anyone listening who thinks revenge feels like fireworks, it didn't. It felt like the quiet, flat satisfaction of closing a file that had been open far too long. 3 weeks after that call, an envelope arrived at my new address, forwarded through Marvin's office so no one could trace it back to me directly. Inside was a letter in Nathan's handwriting, the same handwriting I'd watched develop from crayon scrawl to a doctor's careful print. "Dad," it began, and I sat with that word for a long time before reading further. "I know I don't have the right to call you that anymore. I know what I said. Mom told me it would make Dad feel included if I said you weren't my real family, and I didn't understand what that would actually cost until it cost me everything. I'm not writing to ask for money. I know better now. I just wanted you to know that I found the stethoscope in your old toolbox before we left the house, the one with my initials. Mom said to throw it out. I couldn't. I don't expect anything back from you, but I wanted you to know I still have it. And some nights I take it out and just hold it, and I think about the man who actually raised me. I read that letter twice on the porch, and then I folded it and set it beside my coffee, and I did not cry. Because 31 years in risk management teaches you to feel things in private, on your own schedule, not on anyone else's. I did not write back that week. I am still deciding what I want to say, and for the first time in 19 years, that decision belongs entirely to me. The mountains outside Asheville are quiet in a way that Ohio never was. There is no ringing phone here, no smoothie blender drowning out a conversation nobody wanted to have honestly in the first place. There is just the wind through the pines and, some evenings, the low hum of a neighbor's tractor 2 ridges over, a man named Earl who knows nothing about my old life and asks nothing more of me than whether my tomatoes are coming in early this year. I poured a glass of bourbon that night and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out over a valley that belonged to no one but me. I thought about Russell, wherever he was sitting in a federal holding cell, discovering that the son he'd used as a prop for one photograph had cost him the one thing he actually valued, his freedom. I thought about Carol, standing behind a reception desk asking strangers to please take a seat. The doctor will be right with you. And I thought about Nathan, 23 years old, holding an old stethoscope in a rented room somewhere, finally understanding the difference between a man who shares your blood and a man who shows up. I raised my glass to the dark tree line. To Russell, I said quietly, thank you for finally showing that boy who the real ATM was all along, and who the real father was too. I drank, and the bourbon was warm going down, the way something earned always is. If you think I went too far, or if you think they got exactly what they built for themselves, tell me down in the comments, because I still haven't decided if I'm going to write Nathan back, and I might just let you all talk me into it. And if you were me, holding that letter, what would you have done? Claude responded, a stethoscope in a toolbox drawer taught me something money never could. Love doesn't disappear just because it's been disrespected. It just waits to be picked. A stethoscope in a toolbox drawer taught me something money never could. Love doesn't disappear just because it's been disrespected. It just waits to be picked back up. Real family isn't proven by blood or by a name on an invitation. It's proven by who stayed up at 2 a.m. helping with an essay. If someone still holds onto your gift, there's still a door open. Walk through it gently. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI, purely for entertainment, though we hope its gentle lesson about love and gratitude still found its way into your heart.